Okay, so here is my sketchbook from yesterday when we were combining the idea of color scheme and texture. You can see I have one row still left to do. So if you didn't quite finish yesterday, that's fine. You can go ahead and finish those today. We're going to add on one additional layer of practice today before working with the transfers in class tomorrow. So here's what you need to do today. You need to finish up your color scheme practice if you didn't yesterday. So you can see that I have my analogous color scheme and it goes all the way across here. I've used different textures on each one. My bubble wrap experiment was actually quite successful. That's kind of a cool technique. My complementary color row is finished, and you can see I tried some different techniques. This one I kind of quite like. It's the wax paper, but instead of laying the wax paper on there flat, I kind of folded and fanned up the wax paper and just got it to stick in parts. So a little more like the plastic wrap technique, but with the wax paper, like this texture that sits in here. So it's kind of the point of the experiments, is that I'm exploring different effects I can create with watercolor. So I need one more color scheme down here before I move on today. If I'm finished, we're going to be painting a portrait over the top of these colors, right? And the portrait that we paint over the top of these colors is going to use only these colors. So if I have decided that the orange and the blue is the color that I'm using, I'm only going to be able to use orange and blue, and obviously black to make some of my colors darker for my portrait. The same would be true up here. If I'm using an analogous color scheme with red, yellow, and blue, my portrait will need to be done in one or more of those colors. So this is the kind of the final phase of the practice. Over on the counter, the top of the cubby where you guys put your stuff, right under where it says painting 2 and 3, the bulletin board, there is a little stack of eyeball photos. Okay, so you are going to choose one of these eyeball photos or grab an eyeball photo sort of randomly. It doesn't matter to me. And what you're going to do is on the counter, under where it says painting 1, there should be a folder with some transfer sheets. They're going to be too big, but you're just going to use a corner quick. And I'm going to pick one of my texture spots, and I'm going to use the one that I think I might use for my project, because this will be a full experimentation for that. And I'm going to take the eye, and I'm going to trace it right down here into my background that I've created. And I'm going to do a little practice portrait, a little practice eyeball on this color scheme background. What this does, it allows me to kind of see how dark or how light I need to paint my background space. And it gives me an opportunity to practice with one part at least of the human face, and also kind of practice working on top of a textured background. So I'm going to give you a couple of reminders here. So as I'm doing my tracing, I am not including anything that doesn't exist. Right? I know he's got eyelashes, but I don't see them. There's just this weird shadow shape here at the upper edge of his eye. So that's what I am transferring, is that weird shadow shape at the upper edge of his eye. I'm resisting the urge to kind of add in eyelashes. I'm also not going to transfer the eyelashes that are down here. For the most part, I'm going to go ahead and paint those in. But I did indicate a little bit lightly where some of these shadow shapes change. Before I move this off of here, I'm just going to take a peek. Yep, it's on there. Now I'm gonna leave my little photo nugget right here, right next door, so that I can see it the whole time that I paint. And I'm gonna mix up, this was my analogous row, so I'm gonna need to use blue because I think that's my darkest color, or I'm gonna experiment with using blue. I guess I could use green too. I'm gonna try it with blue. I'm going to need to mix that blue with black to make some of these darker kind of tones. You can see I'm doing that right here on my palette. A little bit of black, a little bit of blue, trying to mix up a nice deep blue color. If I were using the blue and the orange, I could just go ahead and mix the blue and the orange together and they would make that dark color for me. I am then, if we think back to the portrait in, you know, painting 1, we started by putting a wash down first. I'm not gonna need a wash today because, well, my background already has color. So I think I'm gonna start, and then obviously some of this is personal preference, right? I'm not, how I start. I'm gonna start, I think, with his big eyebrow and work my way from there. What this also does for me is it gives me this big body of dark paint to pull from, knowing that I'll also have to come back and I'll have to darken this. So I'm gonna try to resist the urge to do a bunch of detail work too. So his hair is over here. So I'm gonna do this dark little stripey of his hair and a little bit in the top of his ear. So I'm at the place right now where I have enough paint on the paper that I'm gonna clean my paintbrush. So my paintbrush is clean. I'm gonna take some paper towel and I'm gonna squeeze my paintbrush dry. So I have a clean squeezed paintbrush. And now what I'm gonna do is move this paint. Okay, just clean my paintbrush out again. And then what I'm doing is using the paint that's there to mimic the shadows that are also there in the photo. As soon as my shadow color that I'm moving is a little bit too dark, I'm just gonna go ahead and I cleaned my paintbrush out again. I don't want to get too crazy detailed with like hairy bits on his eyebrow until a little bit later in the process. So kind of trying to resist that moment. And I'm gonna keep pulling paint down. So this is that dark spot that I put in for his hair. And I'm just using that to kind of pull out. I'm looking back and forth at my photo. So I'm looking like back and forth the whole time that I'm working. This section here got a little light. So I'm just gonna bump a little bit more blue paint in there. And I have replicated fairly closely his hair. I'm gonna have to come back and put one more like detail section in there, but now I'm gonna do the same thing with the ear. So I guess if we think back to the portrait, clean my paintbrush out again. In painting 1, this is the process for making that painting happen. We just have sort of the challenge of making it now over a background that's not clean, but instead has this texture on it. I'm gonna have to wait for some of this to dry before I work any more over here. Okay, so I'm gonna let that section dry. I have some work to do still in his ear, but like I said, I think I'm gonna need to let it dry before I do any more of that work. So I just cleaned my paintbrush out again. Cleaned it out, squeezed it dry. I'm gonna do the same thing here now for these shadows underneath his eyebrow. So I'm gonna borrow paint from that eyebrow to build this shadow space here. Along his eye. So I have not, since that first add of paint, I haven't added any paint. I'm just using the paint that I've got here, and I'm manipulating it out and into the space. It's kind of the beauty of watercolor. I will have to come back, obviously, and I'll have to darken his eyebrow because I'm borrowing paint from it. It's going to gradually get a little lighter, but that will be fine. And again, I'm looking over here at my photo the whole time just to make sure that I am achieving the right value structure, okay? So you are gonna go ahead and make a little practice eyeball in your sketchbook right over the top of your textured background to have that experience of working over a textured background, because that is how you're going to be doing your work. So here I have, this is the first time I've added new paint. Make sure as you're working that you're looking back and forth at your photograph. There's no way for me to do this well without my photo being right next to my painting. So it's important for us to get in that habit always of making sure that we have our portrait reference close at hand while we're working. I'm gonna go ahead and darken the pupil of his eye a little bit. Just added a little bit more black to my paint. Just help that pop a little bit out of there. I am now, I'm gonna squeeze my paintbrush dry again. Cleaned it out, squeezed it dry, and now I'm gonna do the same thing I was doing before, and I'm gonna move this paint around. So because watercolor is temporary paint, I'm also lifting some of my background color at the same time up and into the painting that I'm doing. So that's kind of constantly part of what's happening here as well, that I am moving some of that background paint up and in to the color that I'm creating or adding with the portrait over the top. So I'm looking for some of these shadows. And there you go. The other thing that you need to work on today is your document with your images. Those will need to be ready to go. I'm going to have those printed for you so that we can start practicing for tomorrow. That way we can start practicing transfers, using those images to create kind of a collagey background that we'll do first before we create the texture in our work. So you do want to make sure that if you don't have that document uploaded, that you're taking the time today to finish that other portion of the planning. Also to have on your radar is that we're going to need a portrait photo to use for your project. And that does need to be a self-portrait, okay? It's got to be you. It can be you with somebody else. It can be you at a younger age. But it does need to be you. This project has been all about you and creating a self-portrait. So obviously we'd need to use a photo of you to make that happen. Happy painting. This is always kind of fun. So those are your 2 jobs today, okay? Or 3. You need to finish your experiments, your color and texture experiments. Practice an eye. over the top of one of your squares. And be sure to upload your doc with images and text for the project, okay? If you have all of this done by the end of class today, you will be in a perfect spot for us to begin working on this project tomorrow in class.